Well, it's not the way I was hoping to come to you. It's a recording, as you can see by the fact that it's not a live stream. But we had a computer malfunction earlier this evening at our streaming studios, so rather than just delay the show, we figured since there are a select number of people in our socially distanced audience over at the ALHS Historical Society archives, we'd record the show in front of them live and bring it to you later on YouTube. So I am Kyle Cush, the archive technician at the ALHS Historical Society, and I thank you for your patience if you've been waiting for this to be uploaded. This is Movie Night Part 2, and our our first movie night, which was done at this time last year, was films taken by Ichiro Shiino. Today, we bring you films from the collection of the Uyeda family of Nakusp, who were longtime residents of the area from the mid 1940s on, and they we found over 10 hours of Super 16 millimeter footage um, in the Uyeda estate. Some of it is absolutely astounding, and we've taken about 80 minutes or so of the best of that footage and put that in digestible movie form for you tonight. So sit back, grab a snack, and watch along. Now, tonight, you might hear some comments in the background. We actually do have a live audience, a small one, but it is an audience nonetheless. So maybe, hopefully, they can add some input as well as we venture through these movies. So, without further ado, you're going to see the camera go and magically multiply for about half a second while I move the cursor down to begin the film. And here we go. Yeah, you can turn the light out now. So, hopefully, there we go. So there we have the Uyeda sisters, Terry and Mickey. So Taruko and Michio for in full. Um, their parents, Yonezo and Yukie, and their brothers, Masayuki and Atsushi, lived together in two adjacent houses in the cusp for about 65 years. Quite remarkable. So we are looking at their home movies. They took, like I said, about 10 hours of movies uh, over the years and thousands. When I mean thousands of photographs, I mean thousands of photographs. Everybody in the audience here can probably see four boxes sitting in the corner in between the aisle there. Those were stuffed full of photo albums and photo film negatives, like thousands of negatives. What you're looking at here uh, is the waterfront of the cusp. In about 1956, you saw the MV Lardo ferry, which was the ferry that replaced the Minto, and you're seeing a bunch of pleasure boaters out on the water, uh, which is a very busy waterfront. If you were to turn back and look at the waterfront, it would look very different than it does today. It was very industrial. Uh, but yeah, I think you'll see the MV Lardo again later in the show. In 1957, Nakusp Secondary School is built about 2.5 blocks north of the Uyeda houses. And so you see that, and that's Nakusp Elementary School, is the brown school about across the street. You just saw a glimpse of the old green door. So there's Nakusp Elementary School, 8 years old. Right there is where the Bonington Theater would be now. And now you're looking at the houses surrounding the Uyeda house on 7th Avenue. And now you're looking on 2nd. Now, was that if you caught a glimpse of that, was that a Irene Brotherton, maybe?
Maybe.
Yep.
see it again.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Now, here's the advantage of live broadcasting. We can go back and look.
Yeah, she's a Brotherton.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
And she married Everett Nickel, who was from up the
Yeah.
lake. Yeah, so there we go. This is a look at the Nakusp Canyon, Kootenay Creek. So this would be as seen, and you're gonna. Sorry about the funny graphics on the bottom of the screen popping up, but that's the only way I could get this movie window to actually capture for the recording. But there you go. That's the second version of the Kootenay Bridge. This one was built in 1940, and it lasted until the mid-70s, 1977. And then you would cross that bridge and you'd come to the Imperial Oil Bulk Plant. This is located right next door to where the modern Esso station is. And there's Mr. and Mrs. Uyeda. And now we suddenly cut to some July 1st festivities. The Uyedas love parades, so there are hours and hours of parade footage and July 1st footage. So I'm not going to kill you with parade footage, but you'll probably see some of it tonight. Here's some awesome July 1st baseball. Of course, up until the beginning of the 70s, baseball was the main sport in the Cusp. We didn't have a proper rink, although later on you may see some hockey. So hint, hint. There's Terry on the left and Mickey on the right. And there they are standing in front of their house with the high school in background. And of course, that's all developed and built up now. Now, do we know who this person in the middle is?
But I have to think.
Yeah.
No, that's where Karen Coons lives. No, Kalahara.
Okay, so Kalahara. Okay, so here's the distance signs in the middle of the town, and I love that. Pine Lodge, which is true north now, and Saddle Mountain Cabins, that's where Selkirk is now. We have a bird's eye view shot. We have a thumb covering the lens here for a couple of seconds. And yeah, there we go. There's a great distance marker sign. Now, Nakusp Hot Springs, I want to go back and pause it for a second because I love what it says on here. This is a sign on the waterfront below the hillside, and it says Nakusp Hot Springs, 9 miles, 4 miles by car, remainder by trail. For those of you watching who aren't familiar with Nakusp, in the olden days, the road to the hot springs was not completed until 1973. So that was a hike-in only. And we see some underexposed footage here, but Mosley Greenhouses. That's on Broadway. And I assume that would be Mrs. Mosley there. That would be right across from where the hut is. That's the Pine Lodge that was mentioned earlier. That's True North Forestry Consulting now. The Bluebird Cafe, which is where Valley Food Store is now. And then you see the pumps at the Esso station. That is where Hoss and Jill's Bistro is now. And there's the Shell station. It's now a Gas West / Napa, but it's still a garage and has been since 1923. Yeah. And there's the Masonic building, other than a couple of changes to the window. Yeah, post office. Later on, the Nakusp Flower Shop. There's the government office, the courthouse, which is still a courthouse, and there's the Opera House and the old Abriel office. Abriel office is torn down. That is where Three Lions Pub is, and the Opera House is now Sean's Bike and Ski. And there's the building we are in right now, the old Centennial building, which was the old school. It just ceased being the school at the time of that footage. There's lots of footage of other towns. I've cropped them out for the most part, but I did want to leave in some of the Kootenay locations, and this would be Nelson. Mickey, yes, that's right. Mickey Uyeda worked for the Forest Service in Nelson before she came back to Nakusp. Um, look at that old overlady sign in front of the old courthouse. Nelson, another place that looked a lot more industrial back then than it does now. But here's the old Greyhound station. What's cool is that a lot of these buildings that you see, both in Nakusp and in Nelson, are still around. The waterfront looks a lot different, of course. There is the brand new Nelson Bridge. It wasn't even orange yet. That was the year it was built, 57. And this is, yep, Remembrance Day with the cadets marching. And then you have the Scouts and the Cubs. And of course, Terry Uyeda was a Cub Scout leader here for nearly 4 decades. You can see in the background there for a brief second the Legion. Way in the background, that sign would read Nakusp Bakery. It's a bit blurry, but you wouldn't be able to see it. Of course, the bakery was there for about 40 years, about 50 years as well, because it would have been the end of the 40s. Speaking of Brothertons, yeah, we see Irene again, and then that's Bee, her sister, later Bee Pickard, in the background. Now we get into some Christmas footage, which seems appropriate. Christmas is just around the corner. I'm sure every single one of you watching has already stocked up on all of your Christmas goods and have absolutely nothing to worry about. But yeah, you don't see too many photos of places in winter. Everybody likes taking photos in summer. So it's kind of neat to see downtown Nakusp in color in winter in the 50s. Of course, the cenotaph located in the middle of the intersection of Broadway and Slocan. It was moved about 10 years, 8, 9 years after this footage. In the mid 60s, it moved into the park.
Who was the photographer, right? Was it Mr. Uyeda?
Pardon?
Was it Mr. Uyeda that took all the pictures?
No, Claire
Oh, I
was
see.
not there.
Okay. I see.
I think your mother took a lot of photographs.
Yeah. There's definitely photos from, lots of photos from both of the sisters, and
Okay.
ones that are simply labeled Uyeda, which will probably be the ones that their mom took.
Okay.
There is even a bunch of photos that said taken with Atsu's camera.
Oh.
So
Ah.
here we go. We got a Christmas square dance, Halloween square dance. I think this said Christmas square dance on the film canister. I only have one screen tonight, so I can't actually go and look and see what it said on the canister, but I'm pretty sure it said Christmas square dance. And sure enough, here come Christmas lights. All right, now we get into some cool lights. The Dumont Motel. So that tells us that this is in 1962. The Dumont was built in 1961, and of course, is now known as the CMHK2 Lodge. But this is the 60th anniversary of that building this year. That was a brief look inside the IGA, the Red and White Joy's Red and White store at the time, where the general store is now, the Nakusp General Store. And then across the street, you can see the Shell Station sign. And then we have a bunch of decorations at the Davies house. And I'm not kidding when I say there was probably about 8 minutes of footage of that just in front of the Davies house, and it's like, okay. But yeah, so now who's the boy?
That's it, you need his house.
That's at Ueda's house?
Yeah.
Yeah. Then that's a pretty big Christmas card that the Davies gave them, because that's the size of that's taller than the people standing in front of it. But there it is, Joyous Noel from the Davies. And then a good fifth of the footage was Ueda Christmases. So obviously I wasn't going to put in 5 hours and show you the end of Ueda Christmas footage, but I thought it was important to show one. This is from 1962, as you can see behind Mr. Ueda's head. And for those of you who didn't know the Uedas, what made the family very special is that their sons were disabled. And to grow up in a time of internment with two disabled children and to nurture and take care of those children, and later on, take them for, not letting their mobility issues get in the way of them enjoying life, which is probably one of the reasons why they held on to so many things. Having had everything taken away from them during World War II, they wanted to make sure that they kept those memories. Atsu, despite his cerebral palsy, actually published a small memoir before he passed away 2 years ago. He had a photographic memory, so he was able to pick out everything in the house, even though there were parts of the house that he had never been to. We are now looking from mid-1960s parade footage, as you could probably see by that float a couple of frames ago that was all about flooding the lake. So you got some very sarcastic floats around this time, for sure. Again, I didn't want to deluge you with parade footage, but I did want to throw in some because they did take so many. You saw the Cubs float just a couple of seconds ago, and Terry Ueda would have been on that float. This is taken at the intersection of what was then Broadway and Edith. This would now be Broadway and 2nd. That building in the background is Nakusp Collision, which is now Nakusp Glass. And all those houses in the background are still there. They look very much the same. There's the big Nakusp Ski Club float. I think that puts this in 1964, 65, something like that. Chuck wagon races. We do not think of chuck wagon racing very much in the cusp, but they actually did have them a couple of times during July 1st. And as far as I know, no one was injured. Later on, there actually was a decently active chariot racing club, here in the 70s and 80s. We also see some barrel racing. And now we get into some Halloween footage. And not everyone's dressed up. Some people are just...
Everything, Linda Henderson.
Okay, let's go back. Okay, so now... Okay, so we're just going back to... So our audience can... Yeah. Oh, yeah. Yeah.
Amy and Linda Henderson.
I have a feeling you'll see Linda again in a few moments. But what's interesting is that not necessarily all the kids are dressed up. Only about 60% of those kids in that village are dressed up. There's the Lardo again. So this was the ferry that operated between 55 and 69. 69 it was replaced by the MV Galena. And that's also the year that they finally opened the brand new logging road, or somewhat new logging road between Galena Bay and the Cusp, and upgrade it to a full highway, and then you only have to go to Galena Bay to catch the ferry instead of taking a 50-kilometer long 4-hour ferry ride from the Cusp. Terry worked. Her was also involved in forestry. Her sister Mickey worked for Ministry of Forest. Terry worked in the office for B.J. Carney, and their father worked for the Big Bend Mill.
Yes.
Yeah. And so, naturally, those two locations being right adjacent to one another, there's lots of footage of the mill. A lot of it's underexposed, unfortunately, so it came out pretty dark. But this is some of the better quality footage, and you can see by this time Selgar had purchased it. It purchased Big Bend Mill in '52. If you remember the Ichiro Shino films, those were digitized at about 1.5 times speed. So if you remember the mill footage, it was moving around pretty fast. This is a bit more accurate in terms of time. 1958. This is the BC Centennial celebration in the Cusp. This is the beginning of May, and they actually had a Centennial van. So that's what you were looking at there, and they actually had exhibits inside the van that and it traveled around to all the different communities around town, or around the province, I should say. Another shot of the Uyeda house.
Yeah, they had donkey baseball.
Donkey baseball?
Yeah, I'm pretty sure that's.
Okay, I was hoping someone would be able to
Oh,
this out. Oh, Joy's red and white story again. So donkey baseball.
huh.
Okay, I gotta go back and see what that guy had written on his back. Dummy? Dumb? He was DUM something. Now, there was also a metric ton of vacation footage. The Uedas traveled everywhere, all around the world. They were pretty much at every major world fair of the 50s, 60s, and 70s. Uh, there was trips to Japan, trips to Hawaii, trips to Spain, trips all around the world. So, not all, we're the Arrow Lakes Historical Society. I don't know if that would be watching other people's vacation footage would be that interesting. So I've left pretty much most of that out of tonight. But I did include the PNE. This is a visit to the PNE in Vancouver during the late 50s, I think. I think around 58. Just because it is British Columbia, so a lot of you watching will be familiar with it. Um, it's Yeah, it's crazy to think that I was just walking past all of this a month and a half ago. Uh, it looks so different and so much the same at the same time. Oh, yeah. Still one of the longest wooden roller coasters in the world. Yeah. Water Follies of 1959. Speaking of water follies, I think you're going to see some footage from the water follies here. But here we go. Here's the water follies. Okay, so now we are looking back at the waterfront from the ferry. And there's one thing there that is missing from today's waterfront: log booms. Like I said, the ferry took 4 hours to go all the way up the lake to Arrowhead. And along the way, you would pass things such as St. Leon Hot Springs. There's the gates of St. Leon Hotel there. And there's the view aboard the boat. So now we're in Revelstoke. And then I think this is a trip out to Alberta and back. They were staying at the Banff Springs Hotel. So, and then came back around through the Crow's Nest. Again, they loved to travel. Was this Creston? Creston. Yeah. Nope, Vernon. Sorry, Vernon. This is Vernon. So I've got ahead of myself. So they were traveling the other way, so that would have been, those farms would have been coming towards Vernon. Through Spalmsheen, probably. Now, this is some rare footage. As part of the 1958 BC Centennial celebrations, Nakusp's contribution was a reenactment of an Old West robbery filmed by the CBC. Unfortunately, though that film has been lost. Even our own J.D. Ma has tried and searched through the CBC archives and cannot find footage of the bank robbery that was filmed for CBC television. So that makes this the only known footage, moving footage anyway, of the robbery, where 2 blocks of downtown were made up to look like Old West Saloon. And you can see hundreds and hundreds of people turning out on rooftops and lining the streets. Now, thankfully, I think we don't get the end of the robbery where they lynched the bandit off the neon sign in front of the Broadway Cafe. I don't think that's filmed, but I think most of the rest of the robbery is. And everybody, lots of cosplay, old-timey reenactors. One thing I noticed, lots of evidence that horses were being used lying on the street. Yep. Yeah, there we go. And that's the flower bed in front of the courthouse, and then there is the actual courthouse. So after the robbery, there's a procession to the courthouse where they crown the Centennial Queen. Normally, you would have a Queen of the Arrow Lakes. Nowadays, we call an Ambassador of the Arrow Lakes. Uh, there's the reigning Queen, Barb Williams,
And Mrs. Coco.
and then there were so instead of having high school age girls compete for Queen that year, they had the two oldest women in town, Mrs. Jordan Williams and Mrs. Ryden, compete for the honor of Centennial Queen, and Mrs. Ryden was crowned Queen.
Okay. Mrs. Coco. Huh.
And then the Kootenay Kilties, who are a regular, there's Mrs. Jordan Williams, a regular fixture at Nakusp parades over the years.
Yeah.
Yep. Here's Mickey. Now we get to some more July 1st events. I wanted to show, since we saw so many of the parades in last year's movie night, I want to show more of the wacky events that used to go on. So we saw the three-legged race, the wheelbarrow race, here's the sack race, and I think even the adults get into the fun.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Oh, backwards race. And then some baseball action. Um, Now, most years the July 1st game would be Nakusp versus New Denver. Some years would be Nakusp versus Edgewood. Of course, New Denver, their big holiday is always been May Day, always been May 24th. So that's why they were always available to play on July 1st, and vice versa. Now, can anybody tell me where that is? I want to say that's on the waterfront. I only say that because the footage that comes right after it, and that's the BA plant that's on the gas plant that was on the waterfront, and that later moved up to. It's gone through a few different names over the years, but it's still there on 10th Avenue Northwest. This is the Coral Inn Dam on the Kootenay River. I can't quite see who that is. Maybe she steps closer to the camera. But Now, this is along Slocan Lake. We're going through the tunnel on the old Highway 6, which finally, you finally can't walk through it now after all these years. The rocks finally came down on it. And then Silverton Lookout. Now, this is very underexposed, but what this is a trip to the Nakusp Hot Springs. You do not see very much, if any. I can count on my hand the number of photos that we have in our collection from the Nakusp Hot Springs in the 50s, because if you went to the Nakusp Hot Springs in the 50s, you would have seen that things were really falling apart. It had been about 15 years by the time this footage had been taken that anybody had maintained the facilities. So, for the first time, the pool is actually outdoors because the building around it had partially collapsed, and then people started looting it for lumber and things like that. It was that state of disrepair that got the town finally to do something and ultimately produce the complex that we have today. But that was a very rare footage of the Nakusp Hot Springs from about 1957, I believe. Is this the Kelowna Regatta footage? Because you see, okay, so this is the Vernon cadets at the Vernon camp. And then I think this segues into the regatta footage. Yeah, because here we go across the original Okanagan Lake floating bridge, and then, yeah, 1959 regatta. More diving. Can't get enough diving. A bit higher up than what they were doing at the PNE there during the waterfalls, but that's probably because this is competitive. And as you can see, there's also swimming in addition to the boat races, power boat races even. Usually with regattas, you think of sailboats. This looks like the Orchard in New Denver. Or no, this is Slocan. This is Slocan City. Yeah, and that's the Greyhound. Greyhound operated along Highway 6 up until the beginning of the 70s. There it is, bound for trail. Speaking of, think how bustling it is. There's cars and cars and cars and cars. Like it's Nelson. Like, they wouldn't paint the orange bridge orange until 1962. And there's the Nelson Civic Center. They were going to see, or I think one of the sisters was actually in a play at the Civic Center, but the footage was so dark and underexposed they couldn't use it. There is the brand new Nakusp post office, built 1959, 1960, something like that. Um, Prior to that, the post office was located in the Masonic building next door to the Chamber of Commerce. You saw the signs for Canyon Cabins, which is now occupied by Canyon Court Motel, the successor to the Cabins. There's the Over 80, that's where CIBC is. That building was. Over 80 left that for location for its current location in 71, and the bank building was built in 78. Another great. Now, here's a little appetite whetter. This is the outdoor rink at Nakusp. Nakusp did not have a proper indoor arena until 1970. It was officially opened formally in April 1971. Burned down in 78, replaced by the current arena a few years later, or 1 year later, I should say. A few months later, they built it in under a year. So this is the only footage I've ever seen of this rink.
And that's the one that caved in.
Yeah, and so, yeah, in 1950, between 1950 and 1953, they were slowly building an indoor rink at the corner of what was Graham and Grace. That's now 4th Ave, or 4th Street and 3rd Ave, right at the bottom of Stevie's Hill, across the street from where the Anglican Church is now. And around Christmas time, 52, right before 1953 there, that's when it collapsed, and so it was never built. And so they made do with this outdoor rink at that location. And that was the closest thing we had to a proper hockey rink for nearly 2 decades. And this is the only photographic evidence I've ever actually seen of this rink. So I was pretty blown away when I actually saw this, let alone to have it moving in color. Oh, no. Yep. Yeah, shoving your Eaton's catalogs under your under your socks.
We lived 2 blocks from there, and we were having lunch one afternoon, and we heard this poof. And so my dad said to one of the boys, "Oh, something's happened up there." He came back and he said, "The rink just caved in." Oh,
Mhm.
so lucky, because the kids used to play in there.
Oh yeah. So it was actually technically that building was actually outlasted by the building it was meant to replace, because it was meant to replace the old fair building that was next door.
Well, the curling rink used to be another.
Yep. Yeah, the curling rink was there until 78, and then they built the current curling rink as an addendum to the new arena. And you'll notice that too, it does look like it's shunted on a bit. But yeah, it's only then when you see that house in the background does it finally click. Oh, that's where it is. Because of course there's no church yet. The church doesn't get moved up there until 68. Look at the waterfront. Is this flood footage from 61, the summer of 61? Yes. So this is the biggest flood between the big catastrophic flood of 1948 and the construction of the Kootenay Dam is 1961. Uh, Quite a lot of the Nakusp industrial waterfront was surrounded by water, and you also really notice it in photos taken at Folkier and Needles, where the store and the hotels are surrounded by floodwaters. You can actually see by the smoke coming from the beehive burner, even though it's surrounded by water, the Selgar Big Ben mill is still running. And yeah, there we go. 10th to June, 1961, as we can see by that guy holding the sign for the camera. That's one thing. You couldn't narrate on silent Super 16 film, so you have to. Here, can you hold this sign? And speaking of Selgar, there's a treasure trove of film, of video, waiting to be digitized, sitting in the corner of this room. But it's in this really archaic video format that predates VHS, and there's nothing that will play it. Yeah, and it's like that square. They almost look like reels, and so hopefully we can track down a specialized video service that will help us digitize them, because there's a lot of film and it could be an expensive project. Yeah. So is this Castlegar, or is this still Nelson? Because there's Castlegar footage coming up. This must be it, because there's a ferry. And of course, you had the Castlegar Robson ferry. That and there's a Selgar truck. And the gar in Selgar is quite literally for Castlegar. Yeah, cellulose Castlegar, Selgar. Shop easy. And we get some random houses. And of course, at this time, Castlegar is only half the size that it is, because Kinnaird was a separate town. So now they are taking a tour of the pulp mill. Most of that footage I couldn't use because it was all inside, so it never turned out. There's Linda. So this is 62. And yes, I believe we get some clowns and jugglers and acrobats. Now, just to guess, these folks are not from the cusp. So obviously a professional troupe was hired to come in for the day. Of course, trampolines are pretty commonplace in backyards now. That probably would have still been a novelty back then. And no, this is not from the Rose Parade, but I left that frame in there just to show you how much vacation footage they had. That was actually a commercial film that somehow wound up attached to this roll of film
Oh,
and was spliced in the middle.
yeah.
There is also stock footage of the New York World's Fair from 1964. So they must have been actively just buying old film just to have some extra things to watch at home. And then logger sports. Logger sports were a long time fixture of July 1st in the cusp.
I love it.
Yeah. I think he shows up in pretty much every single logger sport event. Yeah. Yeah. So I think the end of that footage was 1964, and that's Amy Yanagisawa's Queen. So, as you can see by that Vernon Civic Arena sign, this is downtown Vernon, and it's definitely changed. And then, if anybody can figure out for me where this motel is, of course, so many of the little roadside motels are gone now, redeveloped and such. But yeah, the motel is kind of a dying art form. Kalamalka Lake, of course, as seen from the original highway. And we're back in Kelowna. Now it's 63. And that was Mickey. And then speaking of places who have changed in 60 years, Kelowna. Kelowna at this point is still about 20,000 people, 25,000 people. It hadn't even merged with Rutland yet. That didn't come for another 5 years or so. Boundary Motel, Greenwood. There's lots of footage of them visiting friends in Greenwood, another town with a yeah, another location of internment, and a lot of the Japanese Canadian population stayed there after the war. There's the Castlegar Robson Ferry again. And that ramp is still there, and that's where Johnny's Grocery is now. And Lion's Head Pub is just to the left. This is interesting because this is Sandon. This is 10 years or so after the washout, and all the debris is still there. The vandals are only just starting to move in now. So a lot of so it's crazy to just see it frozen in time like that. This is Barkerville. This is 7 years after the government takes over Barkerville, something like that. and St. Saviour's Anglican Church, which of course is right at the entrance.
Nelson Walton.
Yes.
So that's right at the entrance to Barkerville when you first come through the gates. The first thing that you reach you is the church. You can tell you're on the Rogers Pass, you know. The Trans-Canada coming through here is still quite new. It was only built in 1962. So it's still a pretty brand new highway. And a lot of those wooden signs pointing up to mountains are still there. That hotel, of course, isn't. Was the Northwoods Lodge. I think it was the Glacier Park Lodge. But they finally tore it down last year, if not the year before. And yeah, I think they're just going to let that all go back to nature. That's Field. There's Creston. So this is the one where they went to Banff, and then they came back around. Yeah. And now they're coming back through Creston, and that's crossing over the Kootenay River. And then this is the brand new Salmo Creston. That's the Brilliant Suspension Bridge, just outside Castlegar. Like I said, they went on lots of trips, so naturally there's lots of footage taken around the Castlegar airport. There's the High Arrow Arms Motor Hotel. It's a Super 8 now. Castle Air Plaza, or Cat Air Plaza. And there it is. Hugh Keenley Side Dam under construction. This is 1966. This footage. And then there's the Celgar Mill in the background. And then there is another brand new building, Selkirk College. Brutalist architecture. If you've ever been to Simon Fraser University, it's the same type of architecture, only 1/30th the size. Yeah, but it's that, you know, lots of concrete. Back at the dam. And then, of course, waterfront here. This is the outfit is called Knight. They were out of, I forget where they were out of, but they were the company that had the contract to do the leveling and put the soil cement barrier, and so that's what you're seeing being poured, soil cement. We were actually lucky enough a few months ago to have somebody come by that actually worked on the project, and everybody that worked on the project were given photos of the
Finished.
of the project as they were working on them. So here, turning around the other way, this is basically standing on top of where Nakusp Public Beach is now, looking at what is left of the Selgar Mill. There's Mrs. Uyeda. Right where she's standing is like the foot of 8th Avenue. And you see Terry, and there's NASA, and you can see the job they have done leveling. And now they've gone to Rothwell Point. They're looking back. You can see the soil cement blanket and has now been laid. But the CPR workshop, which was the last building on the waterfront, is still there. And the last bit of the mill is still there as well. Or coal yard. No, bean mill. So this footage was labeled. This first part was labeled 1968. But you can clearly see a giant arena in the background now, which means that this has to be 1971. Because it was 1970 when that arena was built. So there's no way it could be 68. But yeah, snowmobile races right on top of what is now Helen Zelznick Park inside the rec grounds there. Yeah, at this time, it was snowmobile racing. In the early 80s, it was demolition derbies. And then in the 90s, it was mud bogs. So we do have a little bit of history with auto racing. Did we recognize anybody in that crowd? Miss Sweetheart. So this is the Winter Follies Parade 1968. These steps are ours when we have the chance to. Kinsman and Kennett, they raffled off that snowmobile. Dennis Stanley driving that car. These auxiliaries. So, yeah, 2 parades that year. Candy Obiashi at front? No. Maybe.
Laurie Self.
Well, yeah, at the back. Because I think Candy Obiashi's in the 69 parade for sure, because she was queen. And we've got the photos of her on top of the next snowmobile that they raffled off, which was actually the same snowmobile that they tried to raffle off in 68. They wound up having to raffle it off again next year. And so the Winter Follies, for those who don't know, was basically fun and games wintertime. Most of it took place at the relatively new Summit Lake ski area. So skiing on the ski hill, and then hockey and snowmobiling on the lake across the highway. And there's the rink that they set up. Which must have taken quite a bit to get all those boards ready, especially at the end. Yeah. Today you'd be hard pressed just to find a board that was 15 feet long. And here's the skiing. You'll notice there's no chairlift yet. And it's also a very foggy day, obviously. It's probably actually snowing at this point. All right, another field trip. So it was very common to load up these buses full of seniors and take them on trips. So in this case, the opening of the Nakusp Hot Springs. So I've seen photos of it, of course. The opening, we have lots of those, but this is the only footage we have of opening day at the hot springs. So this was a big event because it actually got an actual in-office premier to actually come to Nakusp, which has happened like 4 times. Doesn't happen very often, but this was a big day. Fun trivia fact: right after this ceremony, the premier, who was Dave Barrett at the time, and Mayor Ernie Hardling and MP Bill King, they then go down to Nakusp and open up the Columbia Heights subdivision. Could you imagine that in 2021? A premier going to the opening of a mobile home park. Yeah, and it was assisted housing at the time, right? So here we go. There's the footage of the first people in the hot springs, and I think we see Hoss Can here at age 12. He's the Can you believe my Charlie Greenwall, Michelle Greenwall? Yeah. Can you believe my dad biked to the hot springs yesterday in the snow? He was there. He loves it. He loves riding a bike in the snow. We have some more winter shenanigans here. I think some of those snowshoes are a bit big for those kids. Yeah, that's more like it. Some of those snowshoes look like skis on those kids. Oh, can we pick out any of those kids? All right. I mentioned earlier that Terry was with Cubs for pretty much 40 years. So it's only fitting. Oh, I remember very distinctly playing inside those bleachers, under the bleachers. So it's only natural that we have some footage of a cubbaree. There's Terry, right? There's Keith Coates in the background at one point, wearing one of those cub leader hats. Um, so I don't exactly know what that game was that they were playing on with the cards there. But usually at these things, different cub groups or troops from around the West Kootenay would gather together and they'd do a giant camp out somewhere. In this case, it's at the rec grounds. Um, Often they would be at Centennial Park in New Denver, and there's a very big one at Fruitvale. And here's another seniors field trip with the buses donated by Selgar. As you can see the logo on the back. And here they are going up to Mica Dam. So I think they go to Trout Lake first. And so that would probably make that the Fish River. And then this is right at the Trout Lake Wharf. Trout Lake Highways Yard, and then we see them. Do we see them get onto the ferry, or do we go out? But yeah, you can see the cabins, Trout Lake Resort. So the Windsor Hotel would be just to the left. There's Ione Falls. Hmm. Yeah, there we go. And that's a cool shot because you rarely see footage of the actual barge carrying the train cars. And so now I believe we have Mayday footage from New Denver. Janice Olson, Queen of the Arrow Lakes. So Colby, if you're watching, there's your aunt. And then you can't have a Mayday without a dance around the maypole. This is interesting. This is the opening of Phase 3 of the Rotary Villa. Which I believe is 1977. And then you have your royalty there. Your Nakusp royalty, and then the ceremonial ribbon cutting. You know, very brief dunk tank footage from July 1st. That whole clip is just this 5-10 second clip of dunk tank footage. Yeah. I mentioned earlier about how we had chariot races here. Well, there we go. As you can see, it's a much larger course than what they used for the chuck wagon races. And then I had to put in this footage of the logger sports just because of how high that was. So I mentioned before about Micah, and here they are at Micah. Micah Dam is about a year old in this clip. And yeah, it's an absolutely mammoth dam, something like 230 meters high. Okay, and then, so as we come to the end, there was one piece of footage that stood out because it was obviously far older than everything else in the box, and it was in Japan. So we'll end the show with a few minutes.
Tea house. I've been to Japan twice, and that
Yeah.
was a tea house.
Yeah. So it's just total culture shock watching this footage, especially in black and white. It's undated. The writing on it is in Japanese, and there weren't any numerals, so I have no idea when this was taken. You can kind of guess, but the family originally came from Kyushu, which is the southwesternmost of the four main islands. Uh, so my guess is that this is from Kyushu, somewhere. It's not a small island, so it could be anywhere. Um, but you really see how the clash of modern and ancient in this, because some of this footage looks positively medieval that you're going to see here, especially once they get into the village here.
They have a lot of outbuildings over there for some reason.
See, look, look, look. Donkey engine. And then this little guy.
They leave stuff outside like that because it's so hot that it will kill any germs and bugs. And then you see out there, they're bedding, they'll put out the window and they sleep on the floor. Already drawing. But yeah, you start to wonder, okay, then who are these people? What's the significance? And it's kind of, we'll probably never know. And that's sort of the, yeah. Yeah, you can definitely see the age of transition where you've got the boy here in the jeans and the dress shirt and the pants, and the older people still in the more traditional garb. Ooh, look how windy it is. Okay, I think I'll call it end to that right there. And I hope you enjoyed it. Yeah. Um,
as we bid farewell to all of you out there in YouTube land. Again, apologies for the circumstances. It was a bit odd, but I hope you enjoyed it, and hope you managed to hear some of the audience comments as well. That was always very helpful. And until then, I bid you adieu and farewell, and we'll see you next time, hopefully with a more regular presentation live stream. Thanks.